What is going on, everybody? Like I had mentioned in previous videos, unfortunately I will have to be selling my Mercedes. Now the reason for that is the topic of today's discussion. So if you have seen my recent video, I unveiled the newest car that's going to be on the channel. It's a 2017 Dodge Challenger Scat Pack, a 392 Hemi Scat Pack shaker. Very long name, I'll go into the details later, that's a topic for a different video. But now that I have purchased that vehicle, I will unfortunately have to be selling this car. And the reason for that is that it really doesn't make any sense for me to have two automobiles. That's twice the insurance payments, that's twice the repair cost, twice the monthly payment. Everything is just doubled. And so it really doesn't make sense for me to have two cars because I don't really need two cars. They have their own specific purpose, but for me, one car does enough that I don't need to have two. The only time I would really need to have two cars is in the wintertime because the Dodge Challenger has no traction and it's not all-wheel drive. I wouldn't be able to drive it in the winter, but to keep this car just to be almost like a beater car in the wintertime, I don't think that's respectful, so to speak, to this car. And I think that the future owner who owns this automobile should enjoy it all the time and not just have it as a car that I drive around in the winter just because it has all-wheel drive. And so come wintertime, I may be purchasing an old car that's maybe a project car that's all-wheel drive for days that are pretty wet and snowy and conditions that do not warrant me driving the Challenger. But that's a topic for a different video as well. That's way down the line, probably 6, 7, 8 months. So that's something that I could figure out later. But for today's video, I wanted to discuss the 5 main reasons why I'm selling this automobile. So let's start with reason number 1. Well, the first reason why I'm selling this car, unfortunately, and it's not because it's a piece of crap or shitty repairs or whatever other comments say. The reason I'm actually selling this car is because I've owned it for 5.5 years. I've owned it from the beginning, and I think I have gotten everything I would have liked to have get, or every experience I've wanted to have owning this vehicle. You know, being a car guy, I think it's time to try something almost entirely different from a Mercedes. That's one of the big reasons why I'm selling this car is, you know, I know almost everything there needs to be known about it. I know all the features that it has. I know all the power. I know all the proportions. I've really just understood everything there needs to be known about this car. I just don't know if there's any more incremental information that I'll receive by owning this car for longer. You know, I've had it for about 75,000 miles. And we've had a lot of fun adventures together, but being a car guy, I kind of want to try a lot of different vehicles. And so I don't want to own just one car for my entire life. I want to have as many as I can and try to have new experiences. And I think that gives me credibility as a car person because then I know what car I actually like and what car I don't. Rather than just, oh, you know, I've owned this Mercedes my entire life. This is as much as I know about cars. I've never had a muscle car, and so I want to understand how they work and etc. and know everything about the Challenger. And so I think it's a good learning experience, but at the same time, it could also be a fun experience as well. And that brings me to reason number 2. The second reason why I'm selling this car is because I've made almost every single video I can think of for my YouTube channel for this car. I've answered pretty much every single question, oftentimes with videos to answer your questions. And so I'm not sure if I can bring new material to you guys and keep you all entertained by keeping the same car on the channel. So I've answered questions about legroom, I've answered questions about power, all the features, etc. It's gotten to the point where I've been asked multiple times the same question over and over in the comments, and I realized that I've made videos about every single one of these. So what I end up doing is just saying, hey, watch this video, it answers all your questions. So, you know, I've gotten to the point where there's really no more questions that need to be asked, and there's no more questions that need to be answered, whether that's videos or even just comments. And that's kind of why I made that video 2 videos ago asking you that if you have any questions, now is the time to ask me because I can actually show it to you. And honestly, there haven't been very many people who have asked me any questions because I've answered most of them, to be honest. So overall, I'm not sure if I could continue entertaining all of you with new videos because I don't really have any topics to make. I've answered almost every question. Now for reason number 3. The third reason why I'm selling this automobile is at the point where I'm at right now, around 75,000 miles, 5.5 years, I've avoided a lot of the bigger expenses that have come my way. So, I mean, of course, I've paid for the yearly service every 10,000 miles, and like I said, I've made videos about everything. I did make a video about that. It's, I think, called the 70,000 mile update. I made a video about how much service costs, but I've kind of avoided all of the big expenses. So those ones are kind of just included in the price of getting this car. You know, you have to get regular oil changes like with every car. This is the same thing. It might just be a bit more expensive because it's Mercedes. But what I mean by big repairs, I mean the ones that include, you know, flushing out your brakes, doing the transmission oil, changing the spark plugs. Those three in particular, those three items were brought up to my attention when I took the car into service last time. They said that, you know, if you're planning on keeping this car for a lot longer, it's recommended that you get those things changed. And I agree. I mean, you know, this isn't just them trying to upcharge me. I agree that, you know, those things, specifically the transmission oil, is what I was most concerned about. That needs to be changed pretty soon. I know that going into it. Now, I've called up a lot of different places, I've talked to a lot of different people, and Mercedes is really the only place that I can go to get that service done. Like, I can't take this to a local auto shop and say, hey, can you change my transmission oil? Because they don't have the right tools, they don't have the right oil. I've called up a ton of different places, and none of them really have the right materials or are willing to take up the job to change my transmission oil. So I definitely won't be able to do it myself. Definitely can't take it to a shop. I have to take it to Mercedes, and that means I'm gonna have to pay probably upwards of almost $1,000 just to get that changed. It gets pretty expensive. And then spark plugs, and then the brake flush that they recommended, and there's other services that are coming up, especially when I near the 100,000 mile mark, that I'm going to have to pay out of pocket that I just don't feel like I'm wanting to pay. So what I mean by this is, I think if I sell it within the next, you know, 1 or 2 months, I'm gonna avoid those expenses, and I'm gonna be driving around a different car, a car that I'm gonna try to get new experiences in. And so for me, it just makes sense that it's the right place, the right time that I sell this car now, rather than wait and get all those services done and potentially lose $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 doing their services and then immediately sell it afterwards. So it just makes sense to try to precede those services and sell it beforehand and avoid all those expenses. Reason number 4. When I purchased the Mercedes, I had my own reasons for doing that. I kind of wanted to have a luxury car to maybe, you know, motivate me to be a little bit more mature, more like an adult. And now I've gotten to the point where I want to be more like a kid, you could say. I want to have a little bit more fun, rear-wheel drive car, a lot of power, etc. But I've gotten to the point where I want to try something different. And what I mean by this is there's a lot of Mercedes-Benz C-classes out there, and I've mentioned this in other videos before, but you know, specifically the W204, it's gotten to the point where it's affordable for a lot of people, and so a lot of people drive around in the Mercedes C-Class. So although it's a beautiful looking car and it does amazingly well at almost just about everything, like I really don't have any complaints about it, but even though that's true, you still see this car almost 5, 6, 7 times a day. And it kind of loses the appeal to car enthusiasts because you see this car so often. You know, it might turn heads because it has specific, you know, features. Maybe if it's black and it looks nice like my car, I would say my car still turns heads, but it's not as striking as, say, you know, a muscle car that's got a shaker hood. No, you know, those are all toys, and I'm not arguing that, but this car is much more commonplace than a Dodge Challenger is in my city. Now, a Dodge Challenger SXT, those are a dime a dozen, but the way mine is outfitted with the stripes and the looks and the appearances, that one's a little bit more unique, and at the same time, I get to stand out. And so, although this car has been amazing, it's just a little bit too common for me now. Back when I purchased it, it wasn't, because it was a very expensive vehicle, you know, relatively expensive, not super outrageous, but it was an expensive car, so it wasn't as common. But now that you can pick one up for about 15, 16 grand, maybe even a little bit less, they're pretty common to find on the road. And you know, to be honest, I don't really need my back seats. I don't drive around people that often, and actually it gives me an excuse if I have 2 seats to not drive people around. And so for that reason, I kind of want to try something more distinct, something that turns heads a little bit more, something that I could take to a car show and not everybody has seen, or, you know, maybe something everybody is interested in, because a lot of people like the Scat Pack shaker hood. I know some of you might suggest, you know, why don't you do some car mods to differentiate your car from all the others on the road? And I like doing car mods, but my issue with it is that it financially doesn't make any sense. So car mods do very little in terms of appreciating the value of your car. So if you have, you know, really cool airbags on the car, and I don't know, maybe a cool wrap or something, you know, maybe carbon fiber splitter, whatever have you, those do very little to actually increase the value of your car when you end up selling it. But unfortunately, they cost a lot up front to install. So I had considered getting maybe a carbon fiber spoiler, little lip, or maybe a front splitter, a rear splitter. those things get upwards of $300, $400, $500 per part. And so I'd end up being down maybe $1,500, and at the same time, my car is worth no more than any other C-Class that has done none of that. So I've been very careful with the mods that I actually purchase and the mods that I install. A lot of the mods that I've received on this car that I've made videos about have been gifts from, you know, friends and family, and they've provided me this stuff so I didn't have to pay out of pocket myself. And so that's why I've been fortunate enough to install mods on this car. But for the most part, I don't really like spending more than maybe a few $100s on a specific mod, because it doesn't end up paying off in the long run, unless you really have a super unique car that, you know, maybe you can show off in car shows and is so unique and so cool looking that maybe then it will appreciate in value. But for the most part, mods don't do that much, and a lot of times the person buying the car doesn't even like that mod, and they'll probably remove it in the end anyway. So you've wasted money, you sell it, you don't get that money back, and it ends up being thrown away anyways. And so that's the fourth reason why I'm selling my car, is because the Mercedes has kind of just become too common on the roads, and I'd like to have something more unique. Reason number 5. Now, the fifth reason why I'm selling this car is probably one of the biggest reasons why I'm doing so, and that is because I have wanted the Dodge Challenger probably since about mid-2015. So I ended up seeing the redesigned and refreshed Challenger when it came out in 2015. I saw it at the Utah Car Show that happens in January. I've made videos about it. But I saw the Hellcat there. And that was the first redesigned Dodge Challenger that I saw, was the 707 horsepower Hellcat, just sitting there in black, all covered up, so you couldn't even come close to it, but you could see it from a distance. And from that moment, I was just shocked about the beauty that this car had. Now, I know a lot of you will disagree and say it's not a very good looking car, or it's a stupid car, what am I doing? Why am I trading a Mercedes or selling a Mercedes for a Dodge? But for me, when I first saw that car back in 2015, I fell in love. And I really wanted to get a Hellcat ultimately, but there's a lot of issues about getting a Hellcat. For one, insurance is a lot more expensive. Two, I didn't want to pay that premium price tag, because especially back then when they came out, they were $70,000, and they were even marked up to $90,000, $100,000 because there's very few of them. And so at that time, I started looking and considering other options. And so naturally, I went a little bit of a step down. I went to look at the SRT and the Scat Pack. And from that moment on, I really fell in love with the Scat Pack, because it offered very powerful performance at probably half the cost of a Hellcat. Now, of course, power is about, you know, 2/3 of what the Hellcat is in terms of horsepower, but the price tag is what's most attractive, because it's about half the price. And so from that moment on, about 2.5 years ago, I kept looking and searching and trying to find ways that I could purchase a Scat Pack. A lot of times I try to talk myself out of it, because it's Utah. There's a lot of snowy, bad conditions. You could probably only drive the Scat Pack maybe, you know, 200 days out of the year. And so I would really try to talk myself out of buying this car, because I thought it was stupid for me to purchase this car and spend, you know, 30, 40, 50 grand, depending on which one you get outfitted and what year you get. But spending that much money on a car and only to drive it a little bit of time, it was pointless. And no matter how many times I tried talking myself out, no matter how many times I, you know, said it was a stupid idea or everything, I'd always come back to that Challenger in the back of my head. And I thought, you know, maybe one day I can get it. One day I can get it. And so this has been a thought that's developed over 2.5 years. And, you know, about maybe 2-3 months ago, it hit me that, you know, it's time for me to get this car, enjoy it, drive it around, and maybe, you know, worst case, come wintertime, I either get a beater car that's all-wheel drive or maybe sell it at that point, but at least I would have the Challenger at some point in my life. And this almost comes back to when I just turned 16 years old. I had actually considered buying a used muscle car back from the 60s. So I looked at the Ford Mustang, Chevy Camaros, old Chevilles, old Challengers, and I had really wanted to buy those cars back when I had just turned 16. But unfortunately, I didn't do so because I wanted modern safety features, modern technology, like air conditioning, airbag, etc., but have the look, the retro look of, you know, the muscle cars that they had back in the day. And so that thought had developed ever since I was 16, and then I never really paid attention to the Challenger until they redesigned it in 2015, and when I saw it at the car show, because they had redone the entire interior, they had changed up the headlights, the tail lights, and they made it really look like a more modern muscle car. And ever since that moment, I really fell in love with the car, so I had known that I needed to make this decision and make this purchase at some point in my life. And that point has come to, this past month where I purchased the vehicle. And so to wrap up reason number 5, this has been a car I've really wanted for the past 2.5 years, but even broader than that, because I always wanted a muscle car since I turned 16. So probably the past 7 or 8 years, I've wanted an old school muscle car, and I finally got it. And so, that's the reason why I'm selling this car, is because although I've loved it and it really has had no issues, I've made videos about some of the issues I've had, and they're really minuscule in terms of what you have in this car, the value that you get from this car. It's really difficult for me to say goodbye to it and sell it, because I was even driving around this car the other day, and it hit me that this car does everything so well. It's so comfortable to drive. It's still quick at accelerating. I can't stress enough that if you are in the market for a sports sedan, you have to check out the C-Class, because it's an amazing and phenomenal vehicle, and it will be very difficult for me to say goodbye when that seller arrives and purchases this vehicle. It's gonna be very difficult, but I know that I have to sell it because I can't really keep 2 cars. There's no need for me to keep 2 cars. And at the same time, I've really wanted this muscle car, this Challenger, for a very long time. So it's time to, sell and hold on to the Challenger. With that, I will say that it has been a phenomenal experience in this C-Class, and continue to ask me any questions that you may have. But you can expect that within the next month or 2, this car will no longer be on the channel. Now, I can't tell you the exact date. It just depends on when the appropriate seller arrives and what price they offer, etc., etc. So nothing is set in stone as to what date it's going to be gone. If you have any questions about what I talked about today, please feel free to leave it in the comments below. I really appreciate the supportive feedback and comments I've received. I know a lot of you don't like this car. I'm sure they don't, because you subscribe due to the Mercedes, but I do have some really fun plans with the Challenger. Includes taking it to the drag strip, car shows, doing some small mods, not huge ones, but small mods. And so I really hope you stay tuned for that, because there will be some exciting stuff. But also, if you are interested in the Mercedes, don't unsubscribe, because there will be videos coming up. But if you do have any other questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I'll either make a video on it or answer any of your questions. But for the most part, it has really been just an amazing experience, and this car has built this channel to what it is today. Hopefully it can continue growing, and I appreciate all of you viewers out there. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and find me on Instagram at Chwazy_. I'm going to keep posting photos of this car, and stay tuned for future videos about this car as well, and of the new Challenger. So I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will catch you all at the next video. Take care.